Today, our topic is money and inflation.
My name is Scott Walla. I'm an economic education specialist at the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. FedEducation was developed to provide economic content and equip people with a better understanding of the Federal Reserve and its policy actions. Our first topic was money and inflation, and we began by comparing three separate yet similar items: the front page of the Wall Street Journal, a subscription card to The Economist magazine, and a $20 bill. I asked the audience to compare these three types of paper, and then I crumpled everything together into a ball and asked for a volunteer to throw it away. As expected, the volunteer wanted to keep the $20, and she promised to throw the rest away later. But why? What makes that type of paper, money, so special?
So we're going to talk a little bit about functions of money to get things started. Okay, so these are characteristics that forms of money have. Money is a medium of exchange. The medium of exchange means that it makes transactions easier to conduct. So in the absence of money, we might have to barter for goods and services. And this would be a problem, say, maybe for me, as an economic educator. If I wanted my transmission fixed on my car, I would have to find a mechanic who would exchange his transmission repair services for a lesson on aggregate supply and aggregate demand. In the absence of a barter economy, we have this medium of exchange. So I come to work, okay, they pay me in cash, and it's easier to find someone who will fix my transmission for money than it is for economics lessons. So that's the first function of money, is that money is a medium of exchange. It's a store of value, okay? So you can take the cash out of your wallet and you can put it in your sock drawer, and you can leave it there for 3 or 4 years, and when you pull it out again, it's got the same value minus inflation as when you put it in. Okay, unlike bushels of corn, okay, in a commodity barter-based economy, you might take a few bushels of corn and stick them in the corner of your shed, and the chickens might eat it, or it might rot. But money is actually a very good store of value. It's a measure of value. So I was talking to one of my friends on the phone this weekend, and I was saying how happy I was that the gas prices were down. I quoted the price. It was $3.29 on Friday, and he said, well, here it's $3.04. Okay, and I was not quite as excited as I once was about cheap gas prices. But we were both quoting prices as a measure of value. Okay, I didn't quote the price of gas in terms of corn, and he come back and price it in terms of chickens. Okay, we both quoted the price in terms of money, and that makes those transactions easier as well.
To further our discussion of money, I introduced a guest auctioneer, and we conducted an auction. Each audience member was given a certain amount of plastic chips, and each chip was worth $1. Our first round consisted of 3 separate lots, or auction items, which represented the total output of our auction economy. These items included a voodoo doll keychain, 2 chocolate bars and a gift card, and a Fred hoodie from the St. Louis Fed. The bidding was fast and furious, and at the end of the first round, we tallied up the winning bids. Then we handed out more chips and held a second auction for an identical group of items. Once again, bidding was fast-paced, and again we tallied the winning bids at the end of the auction.
So this is how things turned out. In our first round, the total price paid for all 3 goods were $30. In round 2 was $103. Now, were there any differences in the goods that were sold between the 2 rounds? No, okay, they were identical, weren't they? So how would you explain the difference in the price? I mean, in round 2, more than 3 times the total price. It was the quantity of chips, right? And the chips in this auction represented money. All right, so would it be safe to at least make an early conclusion that the amount of money has something to do with the price of the goods in the 2 auctions, or in the 2 markets? All right, okay. So we'll go with that. So our prices were higher, presumably, because there was more money in the second round than the first round. All right, so we're going to talk about inflation today, which we'll define as a sustained increase in the average price level of all goods and services produced in the economy. And there are a couple key terms there. One of them is average price level. Okay, so for instance, when the price of gas goes up and down, or the price of milk goes up and down, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's inflation, because inflation is a basket, right? It's the average price level. So instead of looking at the prices of individual goods, when we look at inflation, we look at the price level of that entire basket of goods that are in the measure. So what causes inflation?
Inflation is caused when the money supply in an economy grows at a faster rate than an economy's ability to produce goods and services. In our auction economy, the production of goods and services was unchanged, but the money supply grew from round 1 to round 2. Because the money supply grew and the output of goods and services did not grow, our economy experienced inflation. I needed volunteers for the next part of the program and recruited 5 willing audience members. The volunteers were each given a sign displaying one of 5 symbols which form the equation of exchange.
So let's define our variables. M, we're going to define as the money supply in the economy. We're going to think about coins, we're going to think about currency, we're going to think about deposits and checking accounts, traveler's checks, anything that you spend as money. V is velocity. Okay? When you think velocity, you think speed. In this case, velocity is the number of times per year that the average dollar is spent on goods and services. So you have the amount of money and then the number of times that it's spent in a time period, in this case a year. Our equal sign is just kind of our placeholder there. P is the overall price level, not the prices of individual goods. This is the price level of that basket of goods. All the output sold in an economy. And Q. Q is the quantity of goods and services produced, also known as output.
The equation of exchange is a simple model of a macroeconomy during a time period. MV represents the total amount spent by buyers, and PQ represents the total amount received by sellers. Because this is an equation, one side must equal the other. If there is a change in a variable on one side of the equation, then this must be reflected by a change on the other side of the equation in order to keep MV equal to PQ. I asked M to raise her letter, and Q and V to remain steady. In this example, what happens to P? P must increase in order to keep both sides of the equation equal. In other words, when the money supply increases and neither velocity nor quantity changes, the price level must also increase. We call this inflation. This equation helps us understand the relationship between money supply and price level. The opposite holds true as well. If M decreases and we hold V and Q constant, then P must decrease. Think about a recession. During a recessionary period, V might decrease as people cut spending. Remember, V is the velocity of money, or the number of times a year that the average dollar is spent on final goods and services. So if we see a decrease in V while M and Q remain constant, we can expect to see a decrease in P as well. On the other hand, during an inflationary period, V might increase as people rush to make purchases before prices rise too much. So the money supply might turn over faster, and keeping M and Q constant, P might increase as well, leading to even higher prices and further inflation. The equation of exchange is most often used to describe what will happen over the long run, but it has both long and short run considerations, and this is where it may be more applicable to Fed policy. Assuming that resources are underutilized in a recession, this means there is high unemployment and the factories and equipment are sitting idle, we would expect to see a decrease in Q, the quantity of all goods and services produced in the economy. Under these conditions, how would the variables respond to an increase in M, the money supply? In an economy where resources are underutilized, Q might start to rise in response to an increase in M. Seems simple, right? But what if M stayed high for an extended period? How would these other variables respond? Eventually, P would start to rise as well, and that's where we get the short-run, long-run story of inflation. During periods of underutilization, when the money supply is increased, there will be an increase in output. However, as those idle resources are utilized, idle factories return to production, and the labor market begins to tighten up, an increase in the money supply will be reflected in the price level. This is inflation caused by too much money chasing too few goods. The equation of exchange can be useful in terms of macroeconomic application. It provides a framework for understanding the economy, and it tells about the importance of the money supply. M can be used to influence P and Q. In the short run, it can have some effect on Q, but in the long run, it's all about P. It's all about the price level. The Federal Reserve is the central banking system of the United States. And among other things, the Fed has the job of conducting monetary policy to influence the growth of the money supply. Monetary policy is when a nation's central bank uses its monetary policy tools to achieve such goals as maximum employment, stable prices, and moderate long-term interest rates. The Federal Reserve's dual mandate is to promote the two co-equal objectives of maximum employment and price stability. When people think about the Federal Reserve, they often think about the monetary policy piece. They see Chairman Bernanke testifying in front of Congress or hear about what the FOMC did. But the link between the money supply and the other variables is not always well understood. To summarize, the money supply is important because if the money supply grows at a faster rate than the economy's ability to produce goods and services, inflation will result. And also, a money supply that does not grow fast enough can lead to decreases in production, leading to increases in unemployment.
Our second session focused on traditional and non-traditional tools that the Federal Reserve uses to conduct monetary policy. The Federal Reserve has a dual mandate to promote two objectives: maximum employment and price stability, and those mandates are given to us by Congress. So what do they mean?
Well, maximum employment does not mean zero unemployment. It means that we want as many Americans who want to work, we want them working, we want the economy growing with as many factors of production employed as possibly and used efficiently. We also want price stability, so we want low and stable rate of inflation over an extended period of time. So those are the goals of the Fed. How do we go about achieving those goals?
Monetary policy is an interest rate or money supply tool that a central bank might use to achieve its goals. Traditional monetary policy in the U.S. targets the federal funds rate, the interest rate that banks charge one another for overnight lending. Our most common tool, open market operations, involves buying and selling government securities. We also have discount window lending, so that when the demand for money puts upward pressure on interest rates, we can diffuse some of that pressure through lending, which supports our open market operations.
So how do we use open market operations to accomplish our goals? We're going to do a little demonstration here to show you how that works, and I'm going to ask for a volunteer.
I needed someone from the audience to serve as the treasurer and official record keeper. Then I asked for more volunteers and handed out candy bars as well as $5,000 checking account balances. Simulated $5,000 checking account balances, of course. The first order of business was to determine the money supply, which in basic terms is the amount of currency and the amount of money people hold in checking accounts. I asked those holding $5,000 deposits in bank accounts to raise their hands so that our treasurer could determine the money supply.
Okay, and that is 11 times 5. So our money supply in here is $55,000. Now, I represent the Fed, and I have a portfolio of assets. Right? I have a portfolio of assets like the assets you hold, candy bars. All right. And it's a valuable asset for our society. First of all, it's chocolate. How could you go wrong? It has lots of antioxidants in it. It's really a great time to hold these assets. And I have a portfolio of these assets. Now, the Fed, our chairman, our board of governors, the Open Market Committee, they've been studying the economy. And based on what they've been looking at, the statistics they've looked at, and the trends that they anticipate, they've decided that they need to sell. I represent the Fed, and they need to sell some of the securities in their portfolio. All right, so I'm going to sell some of my candy bars. Is there anyone in here who's willing to buy a candy bar from me for $1,000 from your account?
Sure enough, there were more than a few willing buyers. We crunched the numbers, and after selling 5 candy bars, the money supply in our economy shrank to $50,000. This money, the money that banks have in their accounts, are bank reserves. And when I collect payment for my securities, my candy bars, I pulled money out of the buyer's bank accounts, and banks have less money to lend. When this happens, the money supply decreases. So what will happen to interest rates if there's less money available to lend? When the money supply decreases, interest rates go up.
Now, what if, because of what's going on in the economy, the Fed decides to buy. What if I buy candy bars? And I'm not going to take your candy bars away from you. We're just going to pretend in this case. What if I buy candy bars? I'm going to take your candy bar, and what am I going to put in your account? Money. And so what happens to the money supply?
I pay people for their securities, their candy bars. There's more money in bank accounts. Banks are able to lend more, and the money supply increases. When the money supply increases, interest rates go down, and so this is traditional monetary policy, buying and selling short-term securities and affecting the money supply and the interest rate. This is what we did during the financial crisis. We used the monetary policy tool to push interest rates almost to zero. But what short-term interest rates are at zero, then what do we do? With an economy that was struggling under high unemployment and with a tepid recovery underway, the Fed, as well as other central banks around the world, were left to determine what types of policy to undertake to help stabilize the economy. Analyzing academic research and looking at some things Japan had done in recent history, the Fed decided to use some non-traditional policy tools to affect the economy. The first of these tools is large-scale asset purchases, which has been dubbed quantitative easing, and the Fed has implemented 3 rounds. The first round consisted of buying government and agency securities. The second round was government securities, and the third round started with mortgage-backed securities and then added government securities. The idea was that by purchasing these securities, we'd reduce the supply of the securities in the market, driving up the prices and pushing the interest rates on long-term securities down. The purpose was to help the economy, and by pushing long-term interest rates down, it would benefit people buying houses or cars, long-term kinds of lending. We also did some portfolio restructuring, which was called Operation Twist. Operation Twist involved buying long-term securities, but at the same time selling short-term. So the mix of the assets we held was different. We held more long-term securities and fewer short-term securities, thereby restructuring our portfolio. Another important non-traditional policy tool we've used is our communication strategy. Ben Bernanke, our current chairman, is the first chairman to provide press conferences following a Federal Open Market Committee meeting. In addition, the FOMC began using extended period language or forward guidance, meaning that for the first time the Fed began suggesting expected time frames for the duration of interest rates and or policy actions. The objective is to let the market, to let businesses and consumers know what the Fed has done and what its plans are for the future, with the hope that this will instill confidence and encourage people to borrow and to spend because they have more confidence in the market.
All right, so thank you very much for spending your lunch hour with us. We appreciate it. We hope it was a helpful session, and we look forward to another FEDucation. Thank you.